I'm alive. I'm not in the coffin. The message appeared on my phone just as the last shovel of dirt hit the casket, and for a moment, I thought grief had finally broken something inside my mind. I was standing beside my husband's grave, the autumn air cool against my skin, the scent of fresh earth still heavy in the air. Around me, people spoke in hushed voices, offering polite condolences, their words blending into a distant murmur I could barely register. My husband, Edward Collins, had been laid to rest just minutes ago. Or at least that's what everyone believed. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling slightly as I read the message again, each word colder than the last. I'm alive. I'm not in the coffin. My heart didn't race. It didn't shatter. Instead, it slowed like something deep inside me had gone very still. I typed back before I could second-guess myself. Who are you? The reply came almost instantly. I can't say. They are watching us. Don't trust the others. I lifted my head slowly, my eyes moving across the small group gathered near the grave. My son Daniel stood a few feet away, his hand resting on his wife Rebecca's back in a gesture that looked more practiced than natural. Rebecca was speaking softly to one of the guests, her expression composed, almost serene. Too serene. No red eyes. No trembling hands. No sign that she had just buried her father-in-law. The funeral had been quiet. Too quiet. Everything about it had felt arranged. From the closed casket we were told not to open, to the rushed service that ended before I had time to process the finality of it all. I remembered asking just once if I could see Edward's face. Rebecca had stepped in before anyone else could answer. It's better to remember him as he was, she had said gently, her voice smooth, final. And Daniel had nodded, avoiding my eyes. At the time I told myself they were trying to protect me. Now, standing there with my phone in my hand and that message burning into my thoughts, I felt something shift. Not panic. Not yet. Just a quiet awareness that something wasn't right. I looked down at the grave again, at the polished wood of the coffin now hidden beneath layers of soil. 35 years of marriage. 35 years. Of shared mornings, quiet dinners, and whispered conversations in the dark. And yet, in the final moment, I hadn't even been allowed to say goodbye properly. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Act normal. They're closer than you think. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket without responding, my face calm as I turned back toward the others. Rebecca met my gaze briefly, her lips curving into a small, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel said something to me then, something about going home, about making sure I wasn't alone tonight. I nodded, my voice steady when I answered, though I couldn't remember the exact words I used. All I could hear was that message echoing in my mind. Don't trust the others. I glanced once more at the grave before walking away, the sound of gravel crunching beneath my shoes unnaturally loud in the silence. If Edward was alive, then who had we just buried? And more importantly, why would my own family want me to believe he was dead? I did not go home with them. When Daniel offered to drive me back, his voice careful, almost rehearsed, I smiled and told him I needed some air first, that I would call a cab later. Rebecca watched me closely when I said it, her eyes narrowing just for a fraction of a second before that soft, practiced expression returned. She stepped forward and touched my arm lightly, as if she were comforting me, but the gesture felt calculated, like something performed rather than felt. Do not stay out too long, she said gently. You need rest. I nodded, keeping my face calm, my voice steady, and waited until they turned and walked toward their car before I let my expression fall. The cemetery grew quieter as the last guests began to leave, the distant hum of engines fading into the background. I stood there alone for a while, the wind moving softly through the trees, the fresh grave behind me still too new, too clean. My phone remained silent in my pocket, but I could feel its weight as if it were alive. When I finally walked toward the exit, I did not call a cab. Instead, I drove myself home, my hand steady on the wheel, my mind replaying every detail of the past week with a clarity that had not been there before. The house felt different when I stepped inside. It always does after a loss, people say. But this was not just absence. This was something else. The air felt staged, like a room that had been carefully arranged for someone else's comfort, not mine. I set my keys down on the small table by the door and stood still, listening. Nothing. No sound except the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. Edward's chair in the living room was exactly where he had left it, angled slightly toward the window. His reading glasses were still on the side table untouched. Everything looked right. And yet, nothing felt right. I walked slowly through the house, my fingertips brushing against familiar surfaces, as if I were confirming that everything was still real. In the kitchen, the coffee maker sat clean and unused. Rebecca had insisted on helping the past few days, taking over small tasks with a quiet efficiency that I had once appreciated. Now I wondered what else she had taken control of. My phone buzzed again. I did not reach for it immediately. I let it vibrate once, then twice, before pulling it out and unlocking the screen. "Do not trust your son," the message read. I stared at it, my breath shallow but controlled. Not trust Daniel. My mind resisted it at first, instinctively pushing back. He was my son. I had raised him, protected him, stood by him through every stage of his life. But then I saw it again, the way he had avoided my eyes at the funeral, the way he had let Rebecca answer for him, the way he had nodded when she told me not to open the casket. Small things, quiet things, things I had ignored. Until now. I typed carefully, my fingers precise. "Where are you?" The response came slower this time. A full minute passed before the screen lit up again. "Somewhere they cannot see me. But they are watching you." I lifted my head and looked around my own home, my gaze moving from the doorway to the windows, to the corners of the room where shadows gathered. Watching me. The idea should have frightened me. Instead, it sharpened something inside me. I walked to the window and looked out at the empty street, the late afternoon light stretching long shadows across the pavement. Everything appeared normal, quiet, peaceful, just like the funeral had, just like Rebecca's smile. I locked the door, then checked it again, my movements calm and deliberate. If Edward was alive, then someone had gone to great lengths to make me believe he was not. And if someone had done that, then there was a reason. I set my phone down on the table and looked around the house one more time, seeing it now not as a place of comfort, but as a place filled with questions. I had spent years trusting the people around me without hesitation. That ended today. If they were watching, then I would let them. And I would watch back. The next morning began like any other, and that was the first thing that felt wrong. I woke up at exactly 6:30, the same time I had for years, my body still following a routine that no longer had a purpose. The space beside me in bed was empty, the sheets cool and undisturbed, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to believe that everything that had happened was simply a dream shaped by grief. But then I remembered the messages. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet house around me. No footsteps. No movement. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the distant sound of a car passing on the street. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and checked the screen. No new messages. That silence felt deliberate. As if whoever was texting me knew that waiting would make me think more. And they were right. I got out of bed slowly and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to look outside. The street looked ordinary. A neighbor was walking his dog. A delivery truck rolled past at a steady pace. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would suggest anyone was watching me. And yet I could not shake the feeling. I got dressed carefully, choosing the same kind of neutral clothing I always wore. Something that would not draw attention. Habit. Or maybe instinct. Downstairs, the kitchen was exactly as I had left it the night before. Clean. Quiet. Controlled. I made coffee, measuring the grounds with the same precision I had used for decades, but my mind was not on the task. It was on the details. The small things I had overlooked before. I thought about the day Edward died. How quickly everything had moved. The phone call. The hospital. The explanation that came too easily, too smoothly. I remembered how Rebecca had stepped in to handle the paperwork, how she had spoken to the doctors before I had the chance to ask my own questions. At the time I had been grateful, overwhelmed, willing to let someone else take control. Now that memory felt different. I carried my coffee into the living room and sat in Edward's chair, something I had not done in years. It felt strange, like stepping into a role that was not mine. From there I could see the entire room. The front door. The hallway. The window. Every angle. I took a slow sip and let my eyes move across each detail, forcing myself to look, not just see. My phone buzzed. I did not react immediately. I set the cup down first, then picked up the phone and unlocked it. "Do not go to the police," the message read. I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening slightly around the device. I had not even considered it yet. Or maybe I had, and dismissed it without realizing. The fact that they knew what I might do before I did it sent a quiet chill through me. I typed back, keeping my words simple. "Why?" The response came after a pause that felt intentional. "Because they will know. And then I will disappear for good." I read that line twice, then a third time, letting each word settle into place. Not panic. Not fear. Just information. Whoever was sending these messages believed they were in danger. Or wanted me to believe that they were. I leaned back in the chair, my gaze drifting to the bookshelf across the room. Edward's books were still there, arranged in the same careful order he had always maintained. He had never been careless. Never impulsive. If he was alive, as the message claimed, then whatever had happened was not an accident. It was planned. My eyes moved to the small desk in the corner, where Edward used to keep his paperwork. Rebecca had gone through it 2 days ago, organizing, she said. Helping. I stood up slowly, setting my phone down on the table, and walked toward the desk. The drawers were closed, but something about them felt disturbed. Not messy. Just slightly off. I opened the top drawer and looked inside. Pens. Notebooks. Everything in place. Two in place. I closed it and moved to the second drawer, pulling it open with steady hands. Inside were folders neatly stacked, labeled in Edward's handwriting. I flipped through them carefully, my movements calm, controlled, until I reached one that stopped me. It was thinner than the others. Newer. The label was simple. Insurance. I stared at it for a moment before lifting it out, my fingers tracing the edge of the folder. If everything had been handled properly, there would be nothing unusual inside. That is what I told myself as I opened it. But something deep inside me already knew. Nothing about this was normal. I opened the folder slowly, as if moving too quickly might somehow change what was inside. The first page was a standard insurance document, printed cleanly, professionally, nothing out of place at first glance. Edward's name was there, along with the policy number, the coverage amount, and the date. My eyes moved down the page, reading each line carefully, not skimming, not assuming. That was when I saw it. The beneficiary section. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, just to be certain my mind was not filling in something that was not there. Rebecca Collins. Not me. Not his wife of 35 years. Rebecca. My daughter-in-law. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not sharp. Not overwhelming, just a quiet, steady tightening, like a door closing somewhere deep within me. I turned the page. Another document. This one newer. An amendment. The date caught my attention immediately. It had been signed just 3 weeks before Edward's supposed death. 3 weeks. My fingers remained steady as I traced the signature at the bottom. It was Edward's handwriting. Or something very close to it. Close enough that most people would not question it. But I had seen his signature thousands of times. On birthday cards, on checks, on little notes he would leave for me on the kitchen counter. This one was slightly off. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to make me pause. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting the memory surface. Edward sitting at this very desk, adjusting his glasses, taking his time with every letter, every curve of his name. He was precise. Careful. This signature felt rushed. Or forced. I opened my eyes and continued. There were more papers underneath. Bank statements. Transfer confirmations. Numbers that meant nothing at first until I noticed the pattern. Large amounts moved quietly, consistently over the past month. Counts I did not recognize. Names that did not belong in our records. Rebecca's name appeared again. Not directly. Never directly. But close enough. Connected through joint authorizations, secondary access, quiet permissions that could easily be overlooked if you were not paying attention. I set the folder down on the desk and leaned back slightly, my mind assembling the pieces one by one. The rushed funeral. The closed casket. The insurance change. The money. And the messages. My phone buzzed again, the sound cutting cleanly through the silence of the room. I picked it up without hesitation this time. You found it, the message read. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I looked back at the folder, At the papers spread across the desk like evidence waiting to be understood. They knew. Whoever was sending these messages knew exactly where I was looking, exactly what I was seeing. I typed slowly, choosing each word with care. Why would he change it? The reply came faster than I expected. He did not. I stared at those 3 words, letting them settle into place. He did not. Which meant someone else did. My gaze shifted toward the doorway, toward the hallway that led deeper into the house. Rebecca had been here. She had gone through these drawers, organized them, touched everything. I remembered the way she had moved through the house with quiet confidence, as if she already knew where everything belonged, as if she had been preparing for something. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Do not let them know you know. I exhaled slowly, placing the phone back on the desk. The house was still quiet. Too quiet. Every object around me suddenly felt like part of a larger arrangement, something carefully constructed while I was too distracted to notice. I gathered the papers, aligning them exactly as I had found them, and returned the folder to its place in the drawer. When I closed it, I made sure it looked untouched. Then I stood there for a moment, my hand resting lightly on the edge of the desk. 35 years of marriage. And now I was standing in my own home, realizing that I might have been the only one who did not know what was really happening. I straightened, my posture calm, my expression composed, and turned toward the hallway. If Rebecca had changed those documents, then she had a reason. And if she had a reason, then this was not just about money. This was about control. And I had just stepped into the part of the story where they expected me to remain quiet, confused, and unaware. I had no intention of giving them that. I did not confront them that day. I made lunch. I washed the dishes. I moved through the house exactly as I always had, my hands steady, my steps unhurried, every motion deliberate. If someone was watching me, I wanted them to see nothing change. That was the first decision I made. The second was to listen. By early afternoon, Daniel and Rebecca arrived without calling ahead, just as they had done several times over the past week. That used to feel comforting. Now it felt like a pattern. I heard their car pull into the driveway before I saw them, the soft crunch of tires against gravel followed by the sound of the front door opening. Rebecca stepped in first, her voice warm, carefully measured. Margaret, we thought you might need some company. I turned from the kitchen counter, drying my hands on a towel, and smiled in a way that felt natural enough to pass. That is kind of you, I said. Daniel lingered a step behind her, his expression softer, uncertain, but he still did not meet my eyes for long. He never used to hesitate like that. He used to look at me directly, openly. Now there was always a pause, a flicker of something he did not want me to see. They settled into the living room as if it belonged to them, Rebecca choosing the seat with the best view of the house, the front door, the hallway, everything. I noticed that immediately. Control again. Always control. You should not be alone right now, she continued, her tone gentle, almost rehearsed. Grief can do strange things to people. I nodded slowly, letting her words settle between us. Strange things. Like receiving messages from the dead. Like noticing signatures that did not match. Like realizing that the people sitting across from you might be part of something you did not understand yet. I carried a tray with 3 cups of coffee into the room, placing it carefully on the table between us. My hands did not shake. I made sure of that. Rebecca watched me closely as I sat down, her eyes sharp beneath that soft expression. How did you sleep? She asked. Fine, I replied simply. Not a lie. Not the truth. Just enough. Daniel cleared his throat, shifting slightly in his seat. Mom, we have been talking. He began, his voice hesitant. About what happens next. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw how easily he avoided the center of the conversation. What happens next? Not what happened. Not what is happening. Just forward. Always forward. Go on, I said calmly. Rebecca leaned in slightly, taking over as she always did. The house is a lot to manage on your own, she said. We think it might be best if you considered something smaller. More manageable. There it was. Not a suggestion. A direction. A step in a plan that had likely been in motion long before Edward was declared dead. I let a small pause settle in the room, just long enough to make them wait. Then I nodded. That makes sense, I said. Rebecca's smile appeared instantly, quick and controlled, like she had been expecting resistance and was relieved not to find it. Daniel glanced at me surprised but said nothing. I leaned back slightly, my gaze moving between them, memorizing every detail. The way Rebecca's fingers rested lightly on the arm of the chair, relaxed but ready. The way Daniel's foot tapped once then stopped, as if he were trying to control his nerves. "We can discuss it," I added, my voice steady, agreeable. "There is no need to rush." Rebecca tilted her head slightly, studying me. "Of course," she said. "We just want what is best for you." I held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then looked away, as if I believed her, as if I trusted her. My phone remained silent on the table beside me, but I could feel it there, like a quiet presence waiting. They thought I was grieving. They thought I was vulnerable. They thought I would follow wherever they led. I lifted my coffee and took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest as I listened to them talk about practical things, about timelines, about decisions that sounded reasonable on the surface. But underneath it all I could see it now. The pattern, the intention, the plan. And for the first time I was not reacting to it. I was studying it. After they left, the house felt even quieter than before, but it was no longer an empty silence. It was a silence filled with intention, with the echo of every word that had been carefully chosen in that living room. I stood by the window and watched their car disappear down the street, Rebecca in the passenger seat, her posture straight, her head slightly turned as if she were still thinking about me, about what I had said, or what I had not said. I waited until the car was completely out of sight before I moved. Then I walked back to the desk, opened the drawer again, and took out the insurance folder. This time I did not just look at it. I studied it. Every page, every number, every date. The amendment had been processed through a firm I did not recognize, one that was not listed in any of Edward's previous records. That alone was enough to raise questions. Edward was a man of habit. He did not change advisors, did not switch firms, did not make sudden decisions without discussing them with me. And yet this document suggested he had done exactly that. I reached for my phone and took a photo of each page, careful to keep my movements precise, my breathing even. If someone was watching, I would not give them anything to react to. When I finished, I returned the folder exactly as I had found it and closed the drawer. My phone buzzed again, almost as if it had been waiting for me to finish. "You are moving too fast," the message read. I stared at the words, then typed back without hesitation. "I need answers." The reply came quickly. "Answers will get you noticed." I looked around the room again, slower this time, letting my eyes linger on the details I had ignored for years. The smoke detector in the corner, the small digital thermostat on the wall, the decorative frame near the hallway that had been a gift from Rebecca last Christmas. Objects that had always been part of the background now felt placed. I walked toward the thermostat first, my fingers brushing lightly against its surface. Nothing unusual, just plastic and a faint reflection of my own face staring back at me. Then the frame. I lifted it gently off the wall and turned it over. Nothing obvious. No wires. No marks. I set it back carefully exactly as it had been. My phone buzzed again. "Do not search the house." I froze for a moment, the message settling into place. They could not see everything. If they could, they would not need to warn me, which meant whoever was texting me was watching in a different way. Or perhaps they were watching the people who were watching me. I returned to the living room and sat down, placing the phone on the table in front of me. "Then tell me where to look," I typed. This time the delay was longer. Long enough for me to hear the faint ticking of the clock again, long enough for the light outside to shift slightly as the afternoon moved forward. Finally the screen lit up. "Not in the house. Think about where he was last himself." I read the message slowly, letting each word settle. Last himself. My mind moved backward through time, past the funeral, past the hospital, past the strange distance that had grown in the weeks before his death, to the last place where Edward had been normal, predictable, safe. The answer came quietly, almost too easily. His office. Not the desk here in the house, but the small office space he rented downtown, a place he had insisted on keeping even after he retired, saying it helped him think. Rebecca had told me it was already cleared out, that everything had been handled. I had believed her. I stood up slowly, my decision already made before I fully acknowledged it. If Edward had tried to leave something behind, if he had known something was coming, it would not be here where anyone could find it easily. It would be somewhere he controlled, somewhere he trusted. I picked up my keys from the table, my movements calm, measured, and slipped my phone into my coat pocket. As I walked toward the door, I paused just long enough to look back at the house, at the carefully arranged rooms, the quiet order, the sense of something hidden beneath the surface. Then I stepped outside and locked the door behind me. If they were watching, I wanted them to see exactly what I wanted them to see. A grieving widow taking a drive, trying to hold herself together. Nothing more. Nothing yet. I kept my speed steady as I drove downtown, neither too fast nor too slow, blending into the quiet rhythm of late afternoon traffic as if I had nowhere important to be. The sky had turned a pale gray, the kind that made everything look flatter, softer, easier to overlook. I parked 2 blocks away from Edward's office, not directly in front, not where anyone expecting me might notice. Habit again. Or instinct sharpening into something more deliberate. The building itself looked unchanged. A modest brick structure with tinted windows and a small brass directory beside the entrance. Edward had always liked that it did not attract attention. Quiet places are where real work gets done, he used to say. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment before going in, my eyes moving across the street, the windows, the passing cars. Nothing stood out. No one lingered. Still I waited. Just long enough to make sure I was not reacting too quickly, not moving like someone being chased by answers. Then I stepped inside. The lobby smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old carpet. The receptionist's desk was empty, the overhead lights humming softly. It felt like a place between moments, not quite active, not quite abandoned. Edward's office was on the 2nd floor. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, each step measured, my hand gliding lightly along the railing. When I reached the hallway, I paused again, listening. Silence. His door was exactly where I remembered it, the small nameplate still fixed beside it. Edward Collins. The sight of it sent a quiet ripple through me, not grief, not quite, but something close to recognition. I reached into my bag and pulled out the spare key he had given me years ago, more out of habit than necessity, he had said at the time. Just in case. The lock turned easily. Too easily. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, my movements slow, controlled. The office looked untouched. The desk was clean, the chair pushed in, the shelves neatly arranged. Too neat. Edward was organized, but not like this. This felt staged, like someone had erased the small signs of use that make a space feel lived in. I walked further in, my eyes scanning each surface. The computer was gone. That was the first thing I noticed. Not unplugged. Removed entirely. The cables were gone too, leaving only a faint outline on the desk where it had once sat. Rebecca had said everything had been handled. Cleared out. But this was not clearing out. This was selective. Intentional. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket. I did not take it out yet. Instead, I moved to the bookshelf, running my fingers lightly along the spines of the books. Familiar titles. Business law. Financial planning. Things Edward had read, studied, understood. Everything was in order. Almost too perfect. I crouched slightly and looked at the bottom shelf. That was when I saw it. A small gap between 2 books that should have been flush against each other. Just a fraction of an inch. Easy to miss. I reached in slowly and pulled them apart. Behind them was a thin black envelope, tucked carefully against the back panel of the shelf. My hand paused for a moment before I took it out, feeling the weight of it, the quiet certainty that this was not placed there by accident. I stood up and turned the envelope over. My name was written on the front. Not printed. Handwritten. Edward's handwriting. This time there was no doubt. My phone buzzed again. I finally took it out and unlocked the screen. You found it, the message read. I looked down at the envelope, then back at the screen, and for the first time since the messages began, I felt something shift that was not just awareness. It was confirmation. Edward had known. He had prepared something. And whatever he had left behind, it had been hidden from the one person who had tried to control everything. I slid the envelope carefully into my bag, not opening it yet, not here, not in a place that no longer felt entirely safe. As I moved toward the door, I took one last look around the office, memorizing every detail, every absence, every sign of something deliberately removed. This was not the space of a man who had simply passed away. This was the space of a man who had disappeared. I did not open the envelope until I was back in my car with the doors locked and the engine still off, the quiet of the space wrapping around me like a controlled pause between decisions. For a moment I simply sat there, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, my bag on the passenger seat, the envelope inside it waiting. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had shifted, as if nothing had been uncovered. A car passed. A man crossed the street. Ordinary movement. Ordinary life. I reached into my bag and took the envelope out, turning it over again, tracing the familiar lines of Edward's handwriting with my fingertips. My name. Margaret. Written the way he always wrote it, with that slight curve at the end of the T, that he never quite finished. I opened it carefully, sliding the contents out without tearing anything. Inside were several sheets of paper and a small folded note placed on top. I unfolded the note first. If you are reading this, it means they moved faster than I expected. I stopped for a second, letting the sentence settle, then continued. I could not tell you everything, not directly. It was not safe. I needed you to appear unaware. That was the only way to protect you. My eyes moved steadily across the page, my breathing even. Someone close to us has been manipulating my accounts, my documents, and my identity. I allowed it to continue longer than I should have because I needed to understand how far it went. By the time I realized the full extent, it was already too late to confront them directly. I lowered the note slightly, staring at the words without blinking. Not confusion. Not disbelief. Just alignment. Everything I had seen, everything I had felt, fitting into place. I lifted the note again. If they believe I am gone, they will act without caution. That is when the truth will surface. Do not trust appearances. Do not trust explanations that come too easily. And most importantly, do not trust anyone who benefits from my absence. Rebecca's face came to mind immediately. Her calm voice. Her controlled smile. The insurance papers. I turned to the remaining documents. The first was a printed record of transactions, detailed, organized, highlighted in places Edward clearly wanted me to notice. Transfers. Authorizations. Names I recognized now that I was looking for them. Rebecca appeared again. Not always directly, but always close. Always connected. The next page was something else. A list. Dates and notes written in Edward's handwriting. Documenting conversations, changes, moments that had seemed small at the time but now carried weight. Rebecca requested access to account review. Daniel present did not question.
Signature discrepancy noticed.
Each line was quiet, precise, controlled. Edward had been watching, documenting, waiting. My phone buzzed in my hand, pulling me back from the page. I unlocked it slowly. Do not stay there too long, the message read. I glanced up, scanning the street again, my awareness sharper now, more focused. I slid the papers back into the envelope, my movements calm, and placed it back into my bag. Edward had not disappeared. He had stepped back. He had let them believe something that was not true. And in doing so, he had forced them into the open. I started the engine, the soft hum filling the silence, and pulled out onto the street without hesitation. As I drove, the pieces continued to settle into place, forming something clearer, something more complete. This was never just about money. It was about control, about access, about rewriting something that had already been built. And now, for the first time, I was not just reacting to it. I understood it. They believed they had already won. That the plan was complete. That I was alone, grieving, unaware. I kept my eyes on the road, my expression neutral, my movements steady. Let them believe it. Let them continue exactly as they have been. Because now, I was no longer the person they thought they were dealing with. I did not go straight home. Instead, I drove past my street once, then twice, my eyes scanning the familiar houses, the parked cars, the quiet sidewalks that suddenly felt like part of a larger stage. Nothing stood out, and that was exactly what made it unsettling. When I finally turned into the driveway, I parked as I always did, aligned perfectly between the faded lines, and sat there for a moment with the engine still running. The envelope rested in my bag beside me, no longer a question but a confirmation. Edward had not disappeared without reason. He had left a path. And now I was on it. I stepped out of the car and walked to the front door with measured steps, unlocking it and entering the house as if nothing had changed. The air inside felt the same, still and controlled, but I saw it differently now. Every object, every surface, every quiet corner held the possibility of intention. I set my bag down on the table and removed the envelope, placing it carefully inside a drawer in the kitchen. Not the desk, not the bedroom, somewhere less obvious. Then I closed it and turned away, not lingering, not giving the moment weight. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. "They will test you," the message read. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding and moved through the house, turning on a lamp, adjusting a chair, making small, ordinary movements that would mean nothing to anyone watching. By the time I heard the car in the driveway again, I was already in the kitchen, preparing dinner I had no intention of eating. The door opened and Rebecca's voice followed, light and familiar. "Margaret, we thought we would check on you again." I turned, offering the same calm smile, the same steady presence. "That is kind of you," I said. Daniel stepped in behind her, his posture slightly tense, his eyes moving briefly around the room before settling somewhere just past me. They were looking for something. Not objects. Not yet. Reactions. Rebecca moved closer, her gaze studying my face with quiet precision. "How was your afternoon?" she asked. I wiped my hands on a towel, taking just enough time to appear thoughtful. "Quiet," I replied. "I drove for a while." Her eyes sharpened for just a fraction of a second. "Where did you go?" The question came too quickly, too directly. I met her gaze, unhurried, unbothered. "Nowhere important," I said. "Just needed to clear my head." Daniel shifted slightly, his hand brushing against the back of a chair. He looked at Rebecca, then back at me, as if waiting for something more. I gave them nothing. Just the same calm presence, the same measured tone. Rebecca smiled again, but this time it did not reach her eyes at all. "That is good," she said softly. "It is important to take time." I nodded, turning back to the counter, letting the conversation settle into something ordinary, something safe. They stayed for a while, talking about small things, plans, practical details that sounded reasonable on the surface. I listened. I responded. I gave them exactly what they expected. Nothing more. When they finally left, the house returned to silence, but it no longer felt uncertain. It felt defined, clear. I walked to the window and watched their car pull away, my reflection faintly visible in the glass. For the first time since all of this began, I understood my place in it. Not as a victim, not as someone being moved from one decision to the next, but as someone who had been underestimated. They believed I was alone. They believed I was grieving. They believed I was unaware. I turned away from the window slowly, my expression calm, my thoughts precise. Let them keep believing that. Because the truth they thought they had buried was still moving, still unfolding. And now so was I.